Okay, we are. Okay, let's get started. So before we get started, I would want by first that I should remind you all that our mic and is very sensitive. We will pick up every paper, chit chat, and because we are recording this, all the chit chat will be recorded and on the internet forever. Take care of that. Okay. And for now, let's get our seminar started. So for today, we have our Pbot edition of our track seminar, and this is where we are partnered with Pbot Launch and Learn to merge those two together. And today we are very pleased to have Scott Cohen. Scott is, let me see whether I have a title there, Neighborhood Greenway coordinator of Pbot. And today we'll talk about the next stop in the neighborhood. We'll pass the sign sheet.
Yeah, if you're a student, sign in on the sign sheet. Nobody else needs to sign in.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to turn off that sensitive overhead mic so you can have all the side conversations and crinkling wrappers that you want. But before we do that, and before I talk, because I do like to talk, but I would love to hear just briefly from a few of you. I've done this presentation a couple of times or something similar, and I like to start by going around the room and asking people, what's the neighborhood greenway that they bike or walk on most of the time, and then telling me what's one thing that they would like to change on that neighborhood greenway. So we can't go around the whole room and do that, otherwise that would be our whole seminar, and I would like that actually. That would be cool with me, but that's not what PSU is paying me for today. So that was a joke. They're not paying me. Sorry. All right. Well, 0 for 1. Is anybody willing to? Great. Thanks.
I'm Catherine. I ride on Pullman every day.
Mm-hmm.
Colleagues about Central City, and I wish it was easier to cross. My time around.
Yeah, Holman and MLK. Okay. Anybody else? Sarah? Yeah.
Coming downtown from over the Telecom, when you get underneath like the freeway overpass, you're getting onto Harrison. There's a intersection where when you're biking, you have to go and do one of those like question mark shape maneuvers, like in queue for the green light.
Yeah.
And I was thinking whether there's like a diagonal, like the Barnes dance or.
Okay. Another crossing issue. Okay, but this is downtown you're talking about, kind of, or South Waterfronty?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to? Yeah, go ahead. Hey.
Hey, Nathan, with you. I bike on Clinton, but in general, just cross traffic as an issue.
Yeah, the cross traffic that's crossing on the minor streets, north and south. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Same thing.
Same thing.
To the east side of 39th Avenue, so there has been some labor made to protect the local street, but I think it's to the west of 39th, maybe some additional improvements could take place further down.
So you're talking about more traffic on the actual neighborhood greenway?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also what's happening on Division.
Okay. One more. Last one. Last word.
Yeah, Southeast Clinton, and I wish there were less to no cars on greenways because I don't like being overtaken by cars.
Sure. Okay, so you guys are kind of similar on that. Okay, great. All right, I'm turning off your mic now. Now you can chatter and talk. So thanks. I really appreciate you sharing that. When I've done that in the past, I've been really surprised by what people have said to me about, not about where they ride so much or what their neighborhood greenway that they walk or roll on, but the things that they want changed. So I expect to hear a lot about things about, diversion and overtaking cars and things like that. And it's really great to hear about crossings and other things, cross traffic, things like that. So, I think it's really important to start off together, what is a neighborhood greenway? We're going to talk a lot today, kind of dissect what it is and where we see issues and where I hope to lead the program. But, just so we're all on the same page, a neighborhood greenway is, we have a definition in our comprehensive plan and our transportation system plan. It's a residential street is prioritized for bicycling and conditions are enhanced for walking. Okay, that doesn't complete, if I told you that to somebody who doesn't know what a neighborhood greenway is, I'm not sure that would really create a clear picture in their mind. So it's a shared street environment, right? People that are bicycling and people are driving are sharing the same space. It's not a bike lane like we're showing up here or a separated trail. It has to operate with low volumes of cars and slow speeds. And it should connect to places that people want to go. Schools, parks, businesses, neighborhoods, things like that. So I think, that's the baseline we're here. We're not talking about bike lanes. We're not talking about trails. We're talking about shared streets where we're prioritizing bicycle transportation. So before I kind of get more into Neighborhood Greenway specifically, I want to talk a little bit about Pbot's recently adopted strategic plan. I think Neighborhood Greenways hits a lot of what Pbot wants to accomplish over these next few years. These are our 3 core goals for Pbot. We want to make Portland streets safe for everyone. I think Neighborhood Greenways do a great job accomplishing that by slowing down speeds. We want to move people and goods, and we want to do that by providing more transportation options for a growing city. We're not able to build, new roads without plowing over businesses and houses and things like that. So how are we going to get more out of our street network today? And the main way we want to do that is by giving people more options to bike, walk, ride the bus. And Neighborhood Greenways, again, I think really accomplishes that. And then also we want to make sure that we're managing our assets well. The roads are a really costly and a significant aspect or asset for the city of Portland. Neighborhood Greenways also, I think, hits on that, because what we're doing is we're by getting people to bike or walk more, we're easing some of that burden off of our street network. Bikes are pretty low impact when it comes to the street. And then we're also in our strategic plan asking, beyond our 3 core goals, these overarching questions to ourselves. Will the work that we're doing advance equity and address structural racism, and will it reduce carbon emissions? These are big questions that we're asking in all the work that we're doing. And so each time we're coming out to talk about a new Neighborhood Greenway project or figuring out ways to improve the Neighborhood Greenway system that we have, these are the questions that we're asking ourselves in addition to our 3 goals that we're trying to do to make it safer, to provide more transportation options, and to maintain our assets. So I got into Neighborhood Greenways, or got interested in them immediately upon moving here almost 20 years ago. I came from Atlanta, and I was just, I was shocked that the local street network actually connected in Portland, and that some of those connected local streets actually prioritize bikes. It was such a welcoming way to come to a city and be able to move around without a car. I wanted to bike when I got here, but to be able to find a local street right by me, I lived really close to the Southeast Salmon and Taylor and the Southeast 41st, 42nd Neighborhood Greenways. It was a great way to be able to discover the city and be welcomed on a way that wasn't in a car. I didn't start working on Neighborhood Greenways really professionally until almost 15 years later, when at Pbot I started to work on the Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report. Show of hands, who's familiar with the Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Don't worry, we're going to talk more about it. So if you don't know what it is, no problem. That was an effort we undertook internally to try and help streamline and bring together all of our Neighborhood Greenway operations. But we didn't really have a specific staff person at Pbot at the time that was solely focused on Neighborhood Greenways. There was a few people in our division that were taking on more responsibilities around Neighborhood Greenways, and the responsibilities kind of coalesced essentially into the division I work in, which is the Active Transportation and Safety Division at the Portland Bureau of Transportation. And that finally has led, all these years later to a single staff person that is to coordinate the Neighborhood Greenway responsibilities. That's me. I've been in this job for about 6 months now. So one last thing on background, which I've jumped the gun a little bit here. I'll get to that in a sec. I'm a historian by education. I got my master's in American history at this fine institution that we're all in today. And I really think it's important to understand the past, where we've come from, to help us understand where we are at this moment. So I'm going to try and do a Neighborhood Greenways background in a few minutes, and hopefully that'll help us understand where we are today, Neighborhood Greenways 2019. Up here, I have the Upper Southeast Corridor Bicycle Route Study, and it should be being passed around over here. Okay, good, it's getting passed around. Don't hog it, okay? I know, it's fun reading. This is great. This was May of 1986. And does anybody know what the first Neighborhood Greenway was in Portland? Anybody? Shout it out because the mic's off. So, somebody says Ankeny. Ding, 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 it was Salmon. Sorry, you raised your hand. You didn't shout it out. You were polite. What were you gonna say back there? What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was sorry, I was gonna say Ankeny.
Okay, Ankeny. All right, well, Salmon, it was Salmon. 1986. A number of residents that lived around Salmon got together. They went up and down their street. They got petitions signed. They came and approached city staff. They eventually had to go to city council and get a whole report adopted. It took about 2 years for them. And what did they get for that 2 years of effort? They got essentially stop signs on the side streets that were coming up along Salmon, because those were uncontrolled intersections at the time. They also got signs up on poles that said bike route with a bike symbol. They're 24 by 36 sign, maybe green with a white bike on them. You still might see them sometimes in inner Southeast. Eventually, they got some traffic circles too, those small kind of intersection treatments that theoretically slow down traffic as it uses the route. So that was 2 years effort. That was our first Neighborhood Greenway, Southeast Salmon, from roughly 12th to 49th. But shortly thereafter, the Bureau saw that this was a potential good way to create bikeways, and we undertook this study here, the Upper Southeast Corridor Bicycle Study. Hopefully these all look familiar to you. There's, or if not, then take a look. We've got Lincoln Harrison. This is one of our oldest Neighborhood Greenways. Southeast Clinton. You've got Southeast Lab that's coming through here. So this is when we started to look at what were some of the earliest Neighborhood Greenways. And I should say they were called bike boulevards at the time, or just even bikeways, bike routes at the time, that we wanted to undertake. And we were dealing and looking at the same issues then. What's the steepest slopes? What are how many cars are there on these routes? Because these are the things that's going to make a comfortable bike route. And you can see on some of these, Lincoln Harris. Remember these numbers. This is Lincoln Harrison. This is approaching Chavez, 39th at the time. You've got 5,700 cars a day. Clinton had about 2,600 cars a day at Chavez. So we're looking at kind of similar things today that we looked at 30 years ago. Since that time, we've built almost 95 miles of Neighborhood Greenways. And like I said, they've undergone a name change. They were bike boulevards. But the biggest change that in Neighborhood Greenways is really the way that they operate. So, and by that I mean how many cars are using the Neighborhood Greenway and how fast are they traveling. So that's the biggest changes that have happened over how we manage or operate our Neighborhood Greenway system over these last 30 years. The first bicycle master plan that we passed in roughly 96 said bike boulevards are to be implemented on local streets, generally with fewer than 3,000 vehicles per day, through a combination of traffic calming, intersection treatments, and signing. The bicycle plan for 2030, which is the current bicycle plan that we've adopted in roughly 2008-ish or so, didn't lay out specific numbers around auto volumes and speeds. But said when we're choosing new routes, what we should look for is routes were preferred where the 85th percentile speeds were 25 miles per hour or less, and the average daily traffic on the street was 2,000 cars per day or less. Then in the mid-aughts, under Sam Adams, when he was mayor, he directed Pbot, he was also transportation commissioner, to build 15 miles of new neighborhood greenways every year. When we were undertaking that effort, we were looking for streets that had about 500 cars a day. So we were, drastically different than the first bike master plan, and significantly different than what you saw on that Upper Southeast Corridor bicycle route study that was looking at almost 6,000 cars a day on Lincoln Harrison. We've used other engineering principles to kind of help us manage our neighborhood greenway system. In the past, we've used a principle called the impact threshold curve that essentially said the amount of traffic that a neighborhood greenway or traffic calming project can put onto another local street, another adjacent street, is has to be basically directly related to how much existing traffic was on that adjacent street. So if you have a very low volume local street that's got 200 or 300 cars a day, which plenty of local streets do, the amount of traffic that you could add to that street was very minimal based on this impact threshold curve principle. So that really significantly limited the amount of traffic calming, not just diversion, but also even speed bumps or things like that, that could potentially impact another street next door. So then we have all these kind of different operating principles from these different plans and initiatives. And finally, in about 2015, the Bureau undertook a significant internal effort to determine how greenways, both new ones that we would build and the existing ones that we had, should operate. And that was in the City Council adopted Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report. So in the report, Council directed the Bureau of Transportation to update our guidelines for how greenways should operate and to focus on 6 specific corridors or areas of the city first. So what we came up with was internally was a target of 1,000 average daily traffic, or 1,000 cars a day on a neighborhood greenway. That was our target. And the reason we came to that target was because if you look at this chart, this is looking at how many times you'd be passed on a car in a typical 10-minute bike ride with 1,000 cars a day. So you're on a 10-minute bike ride, it's about 1.5 miles. With 1,000 cars a day on average, you're going to be passed about 7 times on that 10-minute ride. So we're talking about once every 90 seconds roughly. Move up to 3,000 cars a day and you're passed about twice a minute. That's significantly different. You're getting passed, 3 times in those 90 seconds instead of 1. And then you get to 5,000 cars and you're being passed 35 times in that 10-minute trip. So that was Lincoln Harrison in the 1986 study you saw. This is Clinton, and this is what we're going for today. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't just looking at 24-hour volumes. So average daily traffic is based on the number of cars that are average throughout the day. But I think, as anybody can attest to, especially in Portland as it's growing, a street can feel much different 23 hours out of the day than it does for 1 hour. And that 1 hour is really important, because that 1 hour that a street can have a lot of traffic is often probably the same time when we're going to have a lot of people that we want to have biking on it. So we passed an alternate guideline that looked at the peak hour and peak direction volume of traffic. And so in that sense, we're looking to try and target about 50 vehicles, 50 cars an hour in the peak hour at the peak direction. And then we have a hard cap at 100. And I should go back. Well, I don't necessarily need to go back, but we're going for 1,000 here, but our cap is 2,000. So when we hit 2,000, that's kind of a red light for us at the Bureau, saying this neighborhood greenway is not operating the way we want it. It's got too many cars on it. And similarly here, we're going for 50 cars a day, but when we hit that 100 cars a day, or I'm sorry, 50 cars an hour, and when we hit that 100 vehicles in the hour in the peak direction, we know we've got a warning light. There's too much traffic at that peak time. So another key operating principle for our neighborhood greenways that came in the Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report was bringing 85th percentile speeds down to 20 miles an hour. 85th percentile speeds is the number of 85% of the cars are going that speed or below. So we're targeting 20 miles an hour. We'd like to have 85% of the cars that are traveling on a neighborhood greenway to be going 20 miles per hour or less. And we did that for safety reasons. If you're struck by a car at 20 miles an hour, you're significantly less likely to be seriously injured or killed than you are at 30 miles an hour. 20 might not seem like a big deal now. If you live in Portland or just travel around Portland, you know that all our local streets are 20 miles an hour. Well, that wasn't the case in 2015. They were 25 miles an hour. And in order to sign a street at 20 miles an hour, there was a recently passed state law. Hopefully you all know this, but to change speed limits is not as easy as some engineer at Pbot just writing a work order saying change that speed limit down. We want it less. We have to go to the state to get authorization to change speed limits, even on a local street that the city of Portland owns and maintains. So we did have at the time in 2015 a recently passed law that said if you have essentially a neighborhood greenway, if you have a street that has traffic calming and less than 2,000 cars a day, then you can change the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. So we have this important volume cap of 2,000 cars a day because that meant we could change the speed limit down to 20 miles an hour and make it a safer street. So we've now progressed. We've got 20-mile-per-hour streets throughout the city on our local streets, which is great. But that's where we were in 2015. And then lastly, the report recommended these 6 corridors or areas to focus on first. These were the streets, these were the neighborhood greenways that had the highest number of cars and the highest speeds laid on top of each other. And so we've tackled several of these: Southeast Clinton, Southeast Lincoln, Harrison, Ladd, and Ankeny. Alameda's still in the early project development stage. Northwest neighborhood greenways are going through a comprehensive planning process now called Northwest in Motion, and we've done about half of Tillamook Hancock. And this is what council directed us to do. They said, temporarily test traffic diversion to manage automobile volumes and collect data to better understand how those measures impact traffic volumes, both on the neighborhood greenways and on local streets. So it's key. We wanted to try and get a better understanding of how these techniques would impact the whole transportation system. So the Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report, we're still in history now here, believe it or not, although we're getting really close to the present. The Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report really set the baseline for how Pbot develops new or updates existing neighborhood greenways. So we're really trying to create a system that's seamless for its user experience. We want people to ride on any neighborhood greenway and have the same kind of experience. I understand that we are not there, but that is what we're going for. And this report was the start of creating those operational guidelines that makes that step towards doing it. But there, of course, is the engineering work to get there. And I think for any of you who have been into any public meetings around neighborhood greenways and diversion projects, or just any Pbot capital projects in the last few years, you know that getting to the engineering work that creates this seamless user experience is challenging. So this is our biggest focus right now, the Neighborhood Greenway Assessment Report. But before we kind of get into some of these bigger challenges around engineering and how we develop these capital projects, I want to ask this question again: what is a neighborhood greenway? Because we have that very specific and to the point definition about it's a residential street where bikes are prioritized, bicycle transportation is prioritized, and conditions for walking are enhanced. But there's more to it than that, right? I mean, there's a lot that's happening on a neighborhood greenway. And if I show you this kind of anatomy of a neighborhood greenway, what are the parts of a neighborhood greenway? I think a lot of you would probably recognize that, it's got the sharrows and speed bumps, and we have guideway signs that are pointing people to places. And there's, oh, look, do I have this? No, I don't have it. Oh, I did? Oh, there it is. Look at that. Stop pointing. We've got median barriers. People have probably seen a lot of these. MLK and Going is a one that comes to mind right off the bat. We've got 20-mile-per-hour signs and rider signs underneath that identify a neighborhood greenway. So these are the elements that make up a neighborhood greenway. But I feel like if you ask a Portlander, even a Portlander who bikes, what's a neighborhood greenway, I think you'd get a lot of different answers. And we're going to take questions at the end. I would love to do I wish I could do questions and interruptions. I would much prefer that, but there's the whole mic issue. So we'll hold that to the end, and I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. I think if you ask them what is a neighborhood greenway, I think you get a lot of different answers. But if you ask people what a bike lane is, they know right away. It is something that is on the street. And I think if you ask them, would you bike on this bike lane? Would you bike on the new Rosa Parks bike lane that's curb tight and it's wide and it's protected either by posts or cars? They would tell you. Whether they'll do it or not, they would be able to give you an answer. And I think similarly, if you ask somebody, would you bike on the Southwest Broadway bike lane, not the nicer one up here at PSU, but the one that's farther south, would you bike on this kind of old style bike lane? I think they would be able to tell you yes or no pretty quickly whether they would do that. But ask somebody if they bike on Northwest Johnson through the Pearl, or Southeast Salmon through Central East Side Industrial District, or Northeast Davis near Providence Hospital, and they're gonna have to think about it. Why are you asking them if they would bike there? What is it that makes that street different than any other street? And I mean, this is to me as an an issue we have with neighborhood greenways. They're really defined by how they operate and essentially by the absence of something. They're defined by the absence of cars traveling fast, but that is an absence of something. That is not the presence of something like a line, like a bike lane. And so there also are lots of streets in Portland that have few cars traveling slowly, but they do not make a neighborhood greenway. So I think that we have this issue of that people don't really know what a neighborhood greenway is. And I think that if people knew what they were and how and why they were better than just any old street, that more people would be willing to bike on them, and maybe some people would be willing not to drive on them. And so we've had some efforts, right? We started, 10-ish years ago with these kind of dinner plates, that were kind of identifying the route, so people would know beyond just the small green sign up on a post that it was a bike route. So we started with these, and these would kind of follow along, and then we upped our game on those and used sharrows in a way that were pretty that were not the traditional way that sharrows were typically supposed to be used as far as an engineering tool. They were typically supposed to be used on busier streets where you couldn't or weren't willing to fit in a bike lane. And we started to put them on local streets where it had nothing to do with the bike lane. We were using them as an awareness tool and as a guide tool. We lowered the speed limit, so that made neighborhood greenways different for a little while. And then we added these rider signs so people would know, hey, this is a neighborhood greenway that you're on. But I hate to tell you this, but people don't always really follow the signs that we put up or even see them. So so we have all of these things that we have on neighborhood greenways, but they're not necessarily bringing up into people's consciousness that this is a special place to bike or this is a specific place to bike. And so I think we also have this other kind of issue with our neighborhood greenways that's directly related to the history and to this kind of idea of legibility or understanding that what a neighborhood greenway is. We've done a lot of different things on our neighborhood greenways. I mean, Portland has just done a lot of different things for our bikeway or just our transportation system in general. We are not afraid to experiment. Go look at Southwest First and Main where we're painting that street. We got Christmas lanes, right? We got green and red lanes right there. I mean, we'll try new stuff. We were, early on in bike boxes, we used to have blue bike lanes. I don't know if you guys remember that, but we used to have blue bike lanes on places of conflict. We were kind of, at one time you might say we were in the vanguard of trying new techniques out. And with that comes a little bit of, an issue here of this idea of what is a neighborhood greenway or what defines a neighborhood greenway. We tried a lot of different things. And there's only one thing that all of our neighborhood greenways have. Anybody know? You'll have to shout it out again so the mic's off. Anybody know what is the one thing that all our neighborhood greenways have? He got it, sharrows. He missed on Ankeny, but he got sharrows. Nice work. 1 for 2 back there. So that's right, sharrows. That's the one thing all our neighborhood greenways have are sharrows. Some have speed bumps, some have diverters, some are next to commercial districts, some are really kind of straight and to the point, and some jog to make connections through neighborhoods. But they have a lot of different elements. I mean, some have these street sign toppers that are great, but we only have them on a few routes. Some have things like this. Anybody know this on Southeast Spokane? This is like a chicane kind of to like, the idea here is that, if you're two cars coming in together on the street, you're going to kind of have to play the chicken game a little bit, and that's going to make it uncomfortable for driving. So we've got this on Southeast Spokane. We gave that a shot. Some have these unbelievable elements. You ride Northeast Holman, so you go through here. This is a little pocket park we have in Northeast Holman. This was a great project a great collaboration between Pbot, BES, and Parks to transform a kind of rundown park into a really nice stormwater abatement, park feature, and transportation thing. So this is great. This is kind of like the best of what I think a neighborhood greenway could be. But we don't have them on all of these. Cities like Vancouver are doing things like this. They're doing a greenback sharrow. We're not allowed to use that here in the States yet, but this is something that kind of raises the consciousness perhaps a little bit that you're on a street that's different, perhaps. So we've got some options, and I think we have other tools that aren't just engineering. I think we have the opportunity to do things more around education and marketing and awareness and things like that. But I do think that because we've had a system that's grown over so many different years, over so many different kind of operating principles, and under a bureau that's willing to try new things, that we have a system that can feel disjointed if you're not in the know. And I want, rather than everybody to be in the know, I want the know to be very obvious. So that's what I'm hoping to go for, and I'd love to, at the Q&A, hear your ideas. I'm hoping that there's some A's coming from you and not just Q's. I'll ask the questions here. You give the answers. Okay, good. All right, good. You're laughing. Okay, so we've got another thing that's a big issue in Portland generally, and that's giving us a problem on Neighborhood Greenways. It's the growth in our city. We knew it was coming. We've been planning for it to some extent, but we've got a lot more people that are living here in Portland and in the region generally, and that's, you know, plenty of those people are choosing to drive, and that is causing us to have an issue on our Neighborhood Greenways. So that overall, our daily average traffic is often meeting our guidelines, but that peak hour of the day is not hitting where we want to. Now, this is a very difficult and hard to read chart, and we do not have to get into the details here. We can later if we want to, but this is mostly to show that we are kind of getting an idea of looking at where that peak hour and peak direction automobile traffic on our Neighborhood Greenways are providing problems. So where you're seeing red, we're over our guidelines. So you can see places like, you can see like a hot spot on a place like, let's see, there it is. So you've got like a hot spot, like it's 16th and Washington here, roughly. But then you look at something like Michigan, and you've got a number of hot spots. Or you look at, you know, Salmon, or you look at, well, that's Tillamook, that's U.S. Grant. Or you look at Morris, Klickitat, Siskiyou. You've got lots of hot spots. So that means we've got a corridor issue. We've got too many cars that are traveling on this Neighborhood Greenway at the peak hours. We've got a commute issue. We've got cut-through traffic problems. So this is our problem. That's we're going to have to figure out the community input aspect that's going to have to solve this issue. We have the engineering tools to fix this. Those are not the challenge. The engineering tools are pretty straightforward, and we know what to do. But we have a public conversation issue where we have to convince our neighbors and our both in the city who live next to us and our neighbors who travel through the city that the engineering solutions we have are the right solutions, and those are not easy conversations. Each conversation, each one of these red dots you can imagine is a very long and drawn out public conversation about what the right answer is, and not everybody agrees that we're even asking the right questions. So this is a big challenge that we have for Neighborhood Greenways moving forward. And again, looking forward to all your answers and not your questions for this. And I'm going to click through these quickly. These are just kind of blowing up on some of these. If you had any kind of that were specific, we could come back to here. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on like where we're seeing volumes. You know, this will be up. You'll be able to kind of shift through this. And this is just the traffic data that Pbot has. So this might not necessarily be a comprehensive overall look at, you know, where we're seeing too much traffic on our Neighborhood Greenways. All right, so before we get to my ideas on how we tackle all these, or I should say, before we get to your ideas on how we tackle all these, right? I just want to tackle a couple of things that we're going to be. I want to highlight some of the things that we're going to be tackling over the next few years for Neighborhood Greenways, and so hopefully then we can get to you can opine about, you know, these legibility issues and these kind of comprehensive Neighborhood Greenway identification things. Too much traffic. We can get into the weeds there. So here's our Neighborhood Greenway map. In the next 18 months, we're going to be building these new Neighborhood Greenways. There's a 50s Neighborhood Greenway in Cully. It's a connector that goes north-south. We're going to be finishing up the 100th Neighborhood Greenway in East Portland. The Holiday Oregon Pacific that goes from Gateway out to the 130s Neighborhood Greenway. We're going to build the 130s Neighborhood Greenway. I think both HOP and 130s are either both under construction, or the 130s might be just about to go to construction. We're also building the 150s Neighborhood Greenway, the Flanders Neighborhood Greenway in Old Town and the Pearl, which will connect to our new bridge over I-405 on Flanders. That's for bicycling and walking only. And then we'll be building Lloyd to Woodlawn, roughly following Northeast 9th. So that's the next 18 months. new neighborhood sorry. I forgot Southwest in Motion implementation plan. So hopefully that's going to pass council soon. There's a lot of neighborhood greenways in the Southwest in Motion plan. That plan doesn't have funding attached yet, so we'll have to find funding to build those neighborhood greenways, but there's a lot of new neighborhood greenways and specifics on how we can build them in the Southwest in Motion plan. Okay, what's coming in the next 3 years, 18 to 36 months? We've got the 4M. I know all the M's. Try me. It's mill, it's main, it's market, it's mill main. It's all 4 M's. And that's from 130th to 174th. We're building a 60s greenway that's going to have a bike lane connection using crossing Halsey. This is part of a Halsey improvement project they have going on. We're building the northern section of that on a different project, also the 60s greenway. We're building this big one, the 70s greenway, that roughly uses the west side. It is a north-south bike route on the west side of 82nd. We already have most of the 80s on the east side. And then we've got a great project in Southeast called the Brentwood Darlington Safe Routes to School project. A small component of that is the neighborhood greenway from 52nd to 87th. Mostly that's about sidewalk infill, but we are getting a new neighborhood greenway down there. This is what we're doing in this next year, or the next 18 months, I should say. These are updates to our existing neighborhood greenways. So we're going to be improving Southeast Woodward from 52nd to 75th with traffic calming, Southeast Steel from 92nd really to 101st. We're going to be, as I alluded to earlier, we're going to be hopefully getting the Northwest in Motion plan adopted by council, which will allow us to go immediately into building new or updating existing neighborhood greenways in Northwest. We're going to do the other section of Tillamook from 28th to 62nd. We're going to plan for and then hopefully build Northeast Alameda. That's going to be an update. And then we also have a couple of small intersection projects, one at 42nd and Alberta Court, where the going Alberta Greenway crosses 42nd. You got to bike up onto the sidewalk there. We're going to fix that, and we're going to do another intersection improvement at where the 40s crosses at Stark. That's our capital. That's our capital for the next 18 months on improving existing neighborhood greenways. That's everything over the next 3 years for capital that we have for neighborhood greenways that we know for sure. There may be some other stuff that come in there. You know, we always can try and look for more money, but this is what we know we have funded right now for the next 36 months. These are some of the program initiatives I want to tackle over the next roughly 18 months. I want to engage historically underrepresented communities around neighborhood greenways to get an idea of how they're working and how they can work better. That's a missing voice in our neighborhood greenway program. And so I really want to make a concerted effort to bring that voice in to get a better idea of how neighborhood greenways could work better for everyone. I want to pilot some of these legibility concepts. I don't have any up there because you're going to tell me that in just a few short moments. So I'm looking forward to all your answers. Nathan, you'll be happy to know we're going to pilot some stop bar implementation on minor intersections. TBD on where we're going to do that, but I'd love to hear your ideas around that. I hope to also evaluate 20 intersections for crash history and safety improvements. I have a small picture here of, this is North Michigan Avenue looking northbound as it crosses Skidmore. We had somebody called our 823 safe line. That's like our kind of like warm line. It's not a hotline, but it's a warm line where you can say, I've got a safety issue here. A traffic engineer will investigate it. And somebody called in and said, I can't cross Michigan or Skidmore at this intersection because it's crazy. There's too much going on. And they were talking about walking across. Traffic engineer evaluated it, found there was an increasing number of crashes each year. These were property only crashes, cars hitting into each other, but it was so much that it warranted a four-way stop. We didn't want to do a four-way stop because that would have added more traffic to Michigan. And if you recall from that slide I showed you of those hotspots, Michigan had hotspot after hotspot. So we didn't want to add any more traffic to Michigan. So we piloted a immediate fix. We were able to get this in within a matter of months as opposed to a matter of years for most of our traffic operational changes, which forces people on Michigan that are heading northbound to take a right at Skidmore and that are heading southbound on Michigan to take a right at Skidmore. And you can, I'm sure some people in here will have feedback about how that's operating, but we hope to do more of this kind of evaluation and see if we can find more quick fixes that improve safety at intersections. Those are our most dangerous places for people that are biking and walking, and that can also make the neighborhood greenway a better place to walk and roll. And then lastly, we're in the midst of a speed bump improvement pilot where we will, where we have channels in the speed bumps specifically for where a bicycle would operate. So basically a channel that's lined up right with the Sharrows. We have that on Clinton between 21st and 26th. That is one of our most atypical neighborhood greenway sections. It's heavily commercial. There's a lot of movements going on with parking vehicles and cars moving through to go from 21st to 26th. We're going to pilot that on Woodward also, which is a more typical type of neighborhood greenway environment, more residential, lower traffic volumes, and generally less activity, and see if it still has the same desired outcome, which is lower speeds. So that's coming up also in the next year or so. We're going to really work to finish all of the neighborhood greenway assessment report project recommendations and move past that. And then once we've done that, what I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do is go to our next steps, which is neighborhood greenway action plan. The neighborhood greenway assessment report, I'm going to go back to this, just this slide real quick. The neighborhood greenway assessment report was essentially internally focused. We looked at data and used data to help us come up with new guidelines and find where the corridors were not working to meet those guidelines. The understanding was that the public outreach and the public process would happen around each one of these projects. Well, we're 5 years in and we're about, 3/4 of the way through these projects. So my hope is that we can undertake a neighborhood greenway action plan that front loads the community conversation around how we want neighborhood greenways to operate and what are the engineering tools that we're going to use to get them to operate that way. And then once we have that lengthy conversation with our community, we can then go to council, have council agree that this is the plan to move forward, and then implement the plan. So it would be similar to several of our in motion plans that we're working on, where we come up with the corridors that we're going to build and the tools that we're going to use to build it, and it goes to council, and then we start to build immediately. We don't have to have the community conversation every time around every element of a capital project. So that is my hope for neighborhood greenways in the future. Once we finish up our neighborhood greenway assessment report project recommendations, this is what city council told us to do. So we need to finish this, and then we can move to hopefully a broader community conversation that leads to a lot of implementation projects to get those neighborhood greenways to a seamless system that everybody understands and feels comfortable on. So that's the end for me. And now it's time for your answers. Yeah, thanks. And you have online ones yet?
I do have a couple online. Let's get somebody from the audience first.
Okay. Yes, please, you right here.
How does all of this fit in with the Green Loop? I think the Green Loop is a wonderful concept. I don't see how it's going to get implemented. And I'm particularly concerned about trying to get through downtown Portland, either as a pedestrian or as a bicyclist. It's dangerous no matter what route I choose.
Well, I think, the Green Loop and neighborhood greenways are often conflated. They're really two different facility types. I mean, the Green Loop is really meant to be, a trail essentially through the city. And neighborhood greenways are really meant to be shared environments between, people that are biking and people that are driving, typically with sidewalks, along them. So neighborhood greenways and the Green Loop, where they will intersect, would be literally on the ground, but where the concepts behind them, they're quite different actually. And I think the Green Loop alignment in downtown is pretty much going to use the park blocks, and I think the idea behind that would really be, people that are biking and people that are walking and people that are driving are completely separated in the space. And neighborhood greenways don't, they really put people that are driving and people that are biking in the same space.
Part of what's inside my question
Mhm.
is that I don't think these should be such separate silos,
Mhm.
because I think that's one of the problems that we face in Portland is there's this group and that group and this
Sure.
and concept 1 and 3.
Mhm.
It's got to get coordinated.
Mhm.
And I'm very concerned that when two entities, two almost competing concepts, I just don't see how they ever get connected, which is what really helps us who are biking and walking. It's kind of immaterial whether I'm on a greenway or a green loop.
Sure.
I'm more concerned about getting from point A to point B safely.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, generally, I agree with you 100%. But the facility type is important for where a greenway in downtown is not going to work very well, because it's really hard to have that kind of low speed, low volume environment that you're sharing. So we need more robust facilities. We need things in downtown in our central city. We need things like protected bike lanes and the green loop, which is why our central city emotion plan called those specific kind of treatments out and really has very few neighborhood greenways. Neighborhood greenways work, if you look at the map, there's really none in downtown. So there is the conversation that's happening, and it's not like, there's a fight over the resources or where they should go. It's just a matter of what facility type I think works for what kind of street or in what part of town that you're in. But I mean, I think that's a good point, and I hear you. Yeah, back there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
It appears that the design is more car-centric than it is bicycle ridership. And you're looking for streets with low speeds for cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's your challenge in converting those streets so that they're just bike riders, so that you have equity in all ages and genders and abilities?
Sure.
So you're not riding your bike with a car.
Yeah, well, neighborhood greenways are meant to be shared environments. So, I mean, we've got a grid of, streets and houses that are, we are retrofitting for the transportation system we want. If we were starting out from scratch, I think we could have more of that conversation. But I think for people that have, garages and driveways, and we built this system around the car, we're trying to retrofit that system around the car. And the way we've done neighborhood greenways is to try to provide the lowest amount of cars that are sharing the street. We do have off-street trails, but neighborhood greenways are not that facility type. So we do have places that are car-free, but it's not on the neighborhood greenways. But I mean, I think that would be a great place to get to. But I want you to come to some of my public meetings where we just try to get the car volumes from 3,000 a day down to around 1,500. Come to the meeting with me, stand there with me, and you see about how we do on getting that street closed off permanently for cars. Because it's not just me. If I'm waving my magic wand, we can maybe do some new stuff. But we are. I work for the public, and we have public conversations, and the public is not there yet. They're barely where I am right now. And so we need to all be together on having those conversations. We don't need to have a consensus, but we need to have more than just a few of us saying this is what we want.
I'm gonna jump in with an online question.
Thanks.
One of the common features of neighborhood greenways at intersections is where stop signs are swapped to allow cyclists to cross the intersection without stopping. How do you evaluate intersections with higher volume roads, which don't traditionally have stop signs at these intersections?
That's great. I wish I had an engineer here with me. I'm just a pretend-engineer, so I can't tell you exactly what sorry, online question. That's a good question. We have, we do look at the classification of the street that it's crossing. So if it's crossing a street with a higher classification, neighborhood greenways, as I said, are residential streets, or in our classification hierarchy, they're typically local streets. That's the lowest traffic volume street, and then it goes to, a neighborhood collector and a district collector, and then something bigger. And so when we get to those higher classification streets, the neighborhood greenway is stopped. But we do have tools in our neighborhood greenway assessment report that says, how many crossing opportunities are the minimum that we should have when the neighborhood greenway gets to that busier street. So if you have to stop on the neighborhood greenway, we don't just leave you hanging out there and say, well, busy street, find your way across. We do use engineering tools and guidance to although you're stopping on the neighborhood greenway, help you get across in a safe or a quicker manner. So that's I think the best way I can answer that question. Do you want to do one more online one, or you want to?
That'd be great.
Okay.
What are Pbot's biggest data needs to help better support the implementation of Greenway projects, particularly data that might help influence the public conversation and potentially push back around them?
That's a really great question too. I mean, the data that we rely mostly on is around, traffic data and the number of people that are, using the street. I think what we need more of that data. So it would be great. I mean, we have essentially a small data team at Pbot that is out there doing all this 24-hour traffic data collection. They're laying the hoses out on the street and bringing the data back to us. So more of that would be helpful, more data folks. But I think what we really need is not necessarily more data, but to tell the story to people that perhaps aren't in this room about why that data and why what we're seeing on the streets is not working for a neighborhood greenway and why they should care that it works. I think we have the data. I think we have the data, and I think we, at least from my standpoint, have made a decent case about why the data that we have and what we're going for makes sense for neighborhood greenways. But I'm not sure that I'm doing a great job, or Pbot's doing a great job yet explaining that to everybody in Portland about why that's important and why they should care. So that's what I think is most.
We'll do an audience one and then come back to me.
Okay, great. Yeah, you. Yeah, you right there.
Great.
Yes. Sorry, I don't know your names.
Yeah. I wanted to offer a couple A's
Yes.
for you, and then also a Q.
Okay. Hold on. Right. Oh, a Q too.
I'll start. You mentioned that the greenback share is something we aren't allowed to do in the States. And I would just point you to Brighton Avenue in Boston as a case study for that.
Are they using them?
And they are.
Oh, great. Brighton Avenue.
So, and that I think could help maybe address the issue of identifying what a neighborhood greenway is.
Yeah. I really like that tool.
Yeah. The second A is just an idea I've had for a while, which is, I believe Professor Peter Firth has referred to it as a J-turn cycle track, which is something we have in Portland. It's at 33rd and Going, which is the separated cycle track outside, which I think could be implemented at 47th and the Davis-Everett intersection.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the Q is, I think you actually confirmed it, but I wanted to double confirm that Portland, the city of Portland, was the first city to use the chevron arrows as a wayfinding tool for the neighborhood greenways.
I am definitely not going to go out here permanently and say, permanently in the web forever that we were the first city to use it. But as far as I know, we were the first. I'm looking at you, Timo, a little bit. Do you know? Yeah. I don't know.
Roger.
I don't know if we were the first to use it in that way. I think we were one of the first to use Sharrows in a way that was different than their intended use. I mean, they were really intended to be that place where a municipality was unwilling or unable to fit a bike lane on a project, and you can put the Sharrows in. They were typically on higher speed roads, and the first place we put them in here was on Northwest 18th and 19th, which are, I don't know if they're actually collectors, but they have higher volumes of cars. They're not neighborhood greenways. They're mostly bike lanes, and then the bike lanes dropped. And we use Sharrows in that place as a test to see how do these work on these kind of like intended place. And we thought, this doesn't really make a comfortable bikeway. And so, but we had this tool in our quiver. We had an arrow and a quiver, and we were like, how can we use these? We don't get a ton of tools that can really help to amplify what we're trying to do that are that meet the kind of the guidelines, the engineering guidelines that we can put out that the traffic engineers feel comfortable putting out without having liability. And so, we can do whatever we want, but really then it's an engineer whose stamp is on there saying like, I've said this is okay and safe. And then there's that personal liability. So that's kind of where the Sharrow was like approved for use on the street. And it was like, well, we can use them like this instead of like this. So, and that's how we went. But I don't know for the first.
So
I think we are, but I don't know for sure, so.
A couple of development questions. Are greenways incorporated into the land use or development code for new developments? And how will you assure that Greenway development is equally distributed along all the neighborhoods? Is there a plan in place that history does not repeat itself?
Is there, I don't understand, say that again?
How will you assure that Greenway development is equally distributed, and is there a plan in place that history will not repeat itself? I'm assuming they're talking about inequity of accessibility of
where greenways are located. So our bike plan for 2030 committed to have Neighborhood Greenway within I think it's a quarter mile of every residential address in the city. So or a low stress, I should say a low stress bikeway, not necessarily a neighborhood greenway, because some places we can't do neighborhood greenways, but we'll have some other kind of low stress trail or protected bike lane within a quarter mile of all residents of the city. So that's not a guarantee that you'll have a greenway within a quarter mile, but that you would have some sort of low stress facility within a quarter mile of your house if, you know, we follow the bike master plan for 2030, the one that we're under right now.
And then how are greenways incorporated into land use or development code for new development?
Well, that's another thing I'll put on my list. That's an ongoing conversation in our land use and development. If we have a new development, they're not under any requirement to do any neighborhood greenway treatments. But what we need to do a better job of is making sure that new developments don't put more pressure on our neighborhood greenways by adding more traffic to them. And that's a definite area of improvement for Pbot and something I plan to take on. Yeah, you've been wanting to ask a question for a long time. Yeah.
Thanks. So towards the beginning of your presentation, you had a diagram that showed kind of the layout of a greenway, the different features, showing, you know, there's a diverter, I think there's speed bumps, there's different signage.
Sure.
There's one thing missing.
Yes.
And that was all the parked cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm mentioning that because I know
those are so unpleasant. We don't want to put those in our nice little diagram.
Well, and I'm saying it because I know Pbot has used parked cars on many greenways to help narrow the roadway, narrow the travel space, so that the moving cars feel the pressure to go a little slower. However, there's also the kind of two-headed monster of, it was called out in PDX, that cars being parked up to the intersection makes it really hard to have the sight lines that are necessary to feel like you can travel safely. And it also provides a destination for cars. Mm-hmm. And I mention that because when we're talking about the traffic volumes, I know I've seen stuff with the central city that a lot of traffic is just people circling around trying to find a parking spot. But I'd wager that there's a decent amount of people not just cutting through for the purpose of getting from A to B faster, but also trying to find a parking spot for a nearby location, because as much as we know that greenways generally don't have destinations, and I know that that's kind of a sore spot at times because you know, it'll be like a block over and then you have to go on the high stress, you know, unprotected bikeway to get to your actual destination. But it seems like restricting parking on greenways in some way, shape, or form to reduce that destination element and prevent people from using it. And an idea that came up, I think it was in last year's traffic and transportation class, was using bike racks, the staple racks, you know, near intersections as a way to let cars know not to park there, and also providing bicycle parking to make it a little easier, because I know there have been many instances where I've had to lock my bike, you know, to a signpost because there wasn't a staple rack nearby, and it seems like that would be a good solution to at least freeing up some of that space for the intended vehicle. Mm-hmm. And calming traffic a little bit.
Well, I think those are some good points. I mean, PDX does say we can pull these parking back from the intersections. That's something we plan to do on every new or updated Greenway project. We'll pull the parking back. So, but we're not gonna. There's not a plan right now to just go over a 95-mile, you know, system and plop do the parking. I mean, it's a capacity and a funding thing. But I mean, for all the new updated or new projects, that will happen. We can talk more about. I don't want to get into bike parking, but I can talk to you about why we wouldn't do. But why I wouldn't recommend putting bike racks, bike corrals, on-street bike parking at the corners of all these places where we're putting that parking. Because I think essentially what we're going to have is an issue of empty bike racks that are just going to be sitting there. And people park their bikes. I mean, I did bike parking for 4 years before I did other stuff at Pbot. You put a bike rack that's like 14 feet from the front door, and then you stick a withery, whispering tree within 4 feet of the door. And all of us, I bike all the time. I mean, I don't because I put the bike racks in, but I mean, all of us lock to that tree, you know? And it's like, if you put a bike rack 400 feet from your destination on a neighborhood greenway, there's nobody's parking in it unless they live on the corner of that house and don't have that corner, you know, live at that house. It's just, bike parking has to be immediately in front of the front door in order for people to use it, by and large. So I saw, time for one more? We don't? Oh, okay.
We have a class coming in 10 minutes.
Oh.
We gotta wrap up, but Chris will get some closing.
Yeah, if you're a student and you didn't get on the sign-in sheet, make sure you come back here and check in with me. And there are some announcements if you're a student for the Student and Transportation Engineering Planning Group, some important announcements about getting funding for TRB. Check those out on your way out. Yeah, we do have a class in 10 minutes here, so if you want, instead of hanging out, we can move out the door. So let's give Scott a round of applause.
If you see a student, faculty, or staff member, please complete the transportation survey that you have received in your.
Can you hand me that sheet, please?
Do it now. But